First of all, thank you for inviting me. I think this is a great opportunity to share, especially as the perspective of a male doula. So I guess just to talk a little bit about myself and my sort of direction. I graduated last year from college, and I currently full-time do research at Boston Children's Hospital. And my long-term goal is to become a doctor. I'm applying to medical school right now. So over the past several years, I've sort of tried my hand at a whole host of different clinical experiences, trying to both like see what it was like to be in the medical field, really confirm that this was sort of the path for me, but also to sort of gain an idea of what kind of specialty I wanted to do potentially in the future, what kind of patient populations I wanted to work with, also to develop different skills of like how to work with diverse different patient populations, because you can specialize in one thing, but you never really know what kind of patient is going to walk through the door. So I guess like what's interesting about me is my background and my like direction over the past couple of years has been very neuroscience focused, which, it's always surprising how I ended up here being a male doula. But like over the past couple of years, I've done like various different volunteer experiences as like I worked at the New York Institute for Special Education, where I worked with kids who had a variety of different learning disabilities. Some had autism, visual impairment, different conditions. And a lot of this was influenced by my younger brother has autism. So that sort of inspired a lot of the different like pediatric behavioral work that I've done. And then sort of on the research end, I've also tried to follow up on some of these clinical experiences I've had by doing research on a lot of conditions that affect like early childhood and like early babies. So for example, the lab that I'm in right now, we study cerebrospinal fluid, which is the fluid around the brain and the spinal cord, and how it contributes to neurological development, and how like changes in the CSF during like the late stages of pregnancy and early on in infancy can actually have a long-term impact on the development of the brain and can predispose kids to, for example, autism, but a number of different conditions. And I first sort of heard about what a doula was and sort of related it to my interests in one of my classes in college. It was a maternal and child nutrition class. And in the first couple of weeks when we were learning about sort of the different social aspects of maternal and child nutrition, our professor had us read an article on, it was a New York Times article about this one woman, I forget her name, I think her last name was Landry, and she wrote this article about how she had a horrible pregnancy experience where she had preeclampsia, and unfortunately her baby didn't make it. And a lot of the, like, she described a lot of the systemic barriers that prevented her clinicians and her from recognizing a lot of the early warning signs, like high blood pressure, like swelling in her limbs. And she really just described the very unfortunate and traumatic birth experience that she had. And then she went on to describe how a couple of years later, she got pregnant again and had a much better experience by having the support of a birth doula, who sort of supported her throughout the later months of her pregnancy and then through her delivery. And fortunately, she didn't get preeclampsia again, but she was just describing in these, like, it was just night and day how she was describing the two different experiences. And as someone who was aspiring to be a doctor, I just kept wondering, like, why? Like, what is it that was missing the first time that, like, I like to think that people who become doctors, like, go on, have a lot of training and, are specialized. So it didn't really compute to me. And I asked my professor, like, what is it about having the doula there that was so helpful? And she couldn't quite give me a great answer either, because she was a nutrition professor. She didn't really have much background in the field. But I did some of my own research, and I was seeing all of these like incredible statistics, like how doulas reduce the rate of cesarean section, reduce the use of like vacuum suction during pregnancy, all of which, like, traumatic birth experiences, all of which are risk factors for these neurological diseases that I was studying, like autism, like cerebral palsy, like hydrocephalus, premature birth, all of these things that I was like really passionate about and actively engaged in studying. And I figured if there was a way that, if there was a way that was this, like, not easy, but this, like, feasible to actually try to prevent some of these conditions in the first place, it would be kind of a cool opportunity to do so. Now, I took this class in the middle of the pandemic, so there weren't really many opportunities for me, like a college student with no experience or background, and knowing full well that most 99, the vast majority of doulas are women. I sort of didn't see like a path forward or like an opportunity, but I always sort of kept it in the back of my mind. And then I graduated and I came to Children's Hospital, and I was doing some research, just generally like looking for some more clinical experiences. And I found the Birthing Gently volunteer program. And again, I didn't see any males on the website, but I was just like, why not? Let me reach out. Let me see. I think I have like a strong clinical background, and I think this would be an outstanding opportunity for me to learn what it is what magic the doula really brings to the experience. Yeah, it was definitely a new experience. I was definitely a little bit nervous, especially, I had never actually, I had taken Tara's like class on how to do the interview, how to all of the tips, but I had never actually done it before. I'd never actually seen one before. So I sort of just went in with an open mind, and a couple of things that I kept in mind were like, I knew that likely the patient would be somewhat uncomfortable with the fact that I was a male. I've heard this before. And I also had sort of advanced warning. The patient that I was matched with did share with the social worker. They were somewhat hesitant. So I sort of just kept all this in the back of my mind, and just, I really tried to be, first of all, just like confident in myself, and sort of just present myself as very like self-assured, which isn't necessarily something I was, but like just, self-assured. And then also I tried to really make sure that the patient was 100% in the driver's seat, like from the first time, like I met her, really reassuring, first of all, that like, I'm here to help. If you don't think that I would be of help for whatever reason, like no worries at all. Like we're here to help and support you. And then just going through and really trying to learn about her, learn about the patient, learn about her history. The first case that I was on was actually a rather complicated case. The woman was unfortunately incarcerated, and she had a sort of complicated social history. So I really just tried to listen rather than talk, just let her talk, let her share whatever she wanted to share. And then more towards the end, I started asking sort of more directed questions about like what I can do, what gaps I can fill, because unfortunately she couldn't have her family there during the delivery, what she had children in the past. So like, what were the positive experiences that you had in the past that I can help sort of recreate? What were some of the negative experiences in the past, or that you're foreshadowing for this birth that I can sort of help alleviate? And I think taking that gentle approach through it helped both of us, helped like her sort of come around, and then also helped me sort of ease into that first meeting.
Yeah. Well, I think you're really highlighting being a doula. A lot of it is relationship building, and and bringing forth your confidence, but also helping the birthing person feel confident in themselves and know that they can do it, they're capable, and you're there to help. I think a lot of people say that their worst fear or worst experiences with birth are not being listened to, being marginalized, in a very, very important situation. So that's wonderful that was the tact you took,
But like, I think I've also really seen the benefit of the doula through this experience. I see that like, obviously the nurses and doctors are highly trained, highly professional, highly caring, but their job isn't necessarily their job is to make sure that everyone is healthy. And sometimes that, especially in like the heat of the moment, in the heat of like a C-section or a delivery with an emergency, sometimes that involves not necessarily listening to the patient. And yeah, that's I think just the act of like having someone there who's literally just listening to you, even if there's nothing that can be done about the things that you're saying necessarily because of the situation, I think it helps tremendously.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we all want to be seen and heard, especially
Exactly.
that vulnerable. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there like a favorite thing that's happened for you, or like a moment where you kind of went, "Oh my God, this is amazing"?
Yeah. So I think one of the cases I worked on was I think the other thing is you kind of find yourself in these really interesting situations that are like just so memorable. So this one particular case was the patient was Spanish speaking only, and I do speak Spanish, not fluently, not like I'm not amazing, but my high school Spanish teachers did a good job, so I can hold a conversation. And part of the volunteer program that it was like right around Christmas, so there was no one really available. But I was in town, I was available for the case, so I took it. And she was supposed to have a C-section early in the morning, like 7. So we got there 5 at Brigham, and we were like getting her checked in, and then sort of just one thing led to another. Like the operating room wasn't properly scheduled, so they like didn't have her on the books. So they said that she was gonna like she might not have it today. So then we sort of bounced from waiting room to waiting room. And the reason that she needed a C-section was because she had really bad pain in her legs, that really wasn't subsiding. So they were going to do an early C-section. And so because of that, they ended up deciding to do the C-section at like 8 a.m. That's when they said they were going to do it. But because of how medicine works, we ended up spending 17 hours together in that in that waiting room until like 10 p.m. when the delivery was. And I think that like to your like aha moment, or like this is really cool moment, was just like spending the whole day with her. This woman who, because it was like an urgent case, I had never met her before. We had like a phone call the day before, but we didn't have like a in-depth like prenatal meeting. And we just had so much fun. We just like talked the whole day. Whenever she would have contractions, I would do like guided imagery for her in Spanish. So, and we would just both laugh at like how I would try, like desperately trying to come up with the words like "estás en la playa, estás nadando," and like I think just like that like comedy of it, like really just trying to make the best of it. I think also like I think that's what I like about medicine too. Like obviously we deal with very tragic and unfortunate situations, but I think both the clinicians as well as the patients just working together to try to find some real positive something, even if it's laughing at me attempting to do guided imagery in Spanish. I think that makes it all worth it. And it like it's been a real like affirming for me, like that I want to do this.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, and a lot of new doulas feel very intimidated by the idea of going to a birth. Often you get your training and then you're just at your first birth, like sink or swim kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you were to give a little bit of advice to somebody who's taken the doula training and now is going to go to their first birth, what would you, now that you have been to birth, say to that person?
That's a really great question. I think I would say just be unapologetically yourself. That's like, don't put up any barriers. Don't like, they don't have time for it. You don't have time for it. I think what's really unique about this particular clinical experience is like, you really have to just be yourself. You really have to just get in the weeds of it, and just like, I oftentimes I would in that first birth, I would look around being like, what am I supposed to do? What am I? And then I would just be like, what would I do in a normal situation? Like what, you know, and also don't be afraid to take risks. Not like, but by risks, I mean like, just jumping in there when you don't, even if you don't, like the nurses are there and the doctors are there, sort of just like find your place, find your voice, like just try to be as confident as you can. And also recognize like this is your first birth. Just you being here is helpful. So like this is also an opportunity for me to learn. And then I will say that like after the first birth, I felt so much more confident because I know what went well, what didn't go well, what I learned what challenges there were. Like one thing in particular was that, so this first birth was a very complicated case. And so one thing that I repeatedly like came across was it's always my nature to say like, oh, it's all going to be fine. Like, oh, it's great. But a lot of the things that she was talking about and that, were worrying and frustrating her, I did not know whether they were going to be okay. They weren't necessarily going to work out the way that all of us would hope for them to work out. So really, like, I would go to say something like, oh, it's going to be okay. And then I would think to myself, how do I refocus her in this moment? Like what with like, how do I make her positive, but without like lying to her or like belittling her very real concerns? So being very aware too in that first birth for like what, and it's okay if you don't say the perfect thing every time. Again, it's a learning experience.
Yeah.
Like my main question going into this was what is the purpose of a doula? Why is it so effective? Why is the care that's being given in hospitals, like in some cases, deficient to the point where this doula is helping? And I think what I've really learned that I'm definitely going to carry with me as in the future is just having someone, a constant presence, being there all day. Even I think it's really helpful if you're supporting them during the end of the pregnancy. I think that's great. And definitely does help. But even if you've never met the person, just having one individual with you all day, like taking like the many different shift changes that there are with nurses, the many different doctors that will come in, the many different procedures, the many different, like just having that one constant, especially for patients who are alone, who don't have a support system, is invaluable. I just having that one constant, like I always think back to that 17-hour day of the number of doctors that we saw, the number of nurses that we saw. Like we could not keep track of their names. We could not like form like close relationships with them in any way. But having me in that C-section room with her at the end of the day, we like practiced all of the music that I was going to play for her. We like we did the imagery again that we had laughed at all day. And I mean, I definitely saw a change in her mood. She definitely was very nervous going in, but I think having that person there, that same person there, was really helpful. And I mean, it's an interesting thing because I'm hoping to go to medical school next year. So like, how do I take this with me as a doctor? Like because the limitations of it's the limitations of the system. It's not the doctor's fault that they are like switching shifts, that, some emergencies come in, so they can't always be on this one case. So like, how do you build hospital systems where you maintain continuity of care, even within the limited resources that we have, especially nowadays after the pandemic?
Yeah, I love that idea because you have a grounding in what it is like to feel humanity in a medical setting, like
Exactly.
stopping and touching someone on the shoulder, even if you can't be there with them for 17 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So. Something that a lot of people, I think, don't realize is that doulas are part of the birth team. They are not an interloper. They're not there to get in the way. They're there to help and to enhance the whole experience. I mean, you're directly involved with the client, and they are your priority, but you're part of the team. And I think that is a misconception that some health professionals have, and some birthing people might also have.
I agree. I think Brigham and Women's Hospital, at least in my experiences, have done a really outstanding job of integrating me into the team. Like I remember for my first birth, when I first came into the room, the nurse came up to me and like gave me a very quick report on where she was and described like what specific tangible things I could do based on her emotional state. She was saying that she was having a lot of difficulty focusing and being present and like sort of listening. And that gave me like a very clear objective and directive, and made me immediately part of the team, doing a very important thing. which was empowering to me, and like also then like gave me the confidence to be like, okay, I can, they want me here, they want me to jump in.
Yeah.
They recognize the importance of the role.